My brother stood at Thanksgiving dinner flashing photos of his new mansion and asked, "When will you finally settle down, Ethan?" What he didn't know was that I lived in a $5 million home he'd never seen because I was too busy cleaning up the mess he left behind. This isn't just a story about brothers, it's about lies, legacy, and the quiet power of truth. Stay with me because by the end you'll see why sometimes silence says everything. Ethan Bennett was not the kind of man who walked into a room and demanded attention. At 35, he had the steady presence of someone who had built his world from the ground up with silence, discipline, and an unshakable sense of self. He wasn't flashy, nor did he wear his accomplishments on his sleeve. But those who knew the real Ethan knew a man of quiet power, someone who moved with purpose and never chased validation. Born and raised in Austin, Texas, Ethan had spent most of his adult life far from the limelight, while his older brother Noah basked in attention and applause. Ethan pursued a path that diverged from family expectations. He had a degree in architecture but turned toward real estate investment, carving out a niche in boutique property developments. His work was unassuming, often behind the scenes, yet remarkably successful. He owned several residential buildings across 3 states, but to his family he was still the one who hadn't figured it out. Ethan adjusted his collar as he stepped out of his rental car, the crisp autumn air of Austin brushing against his cheeks. The long driveway of his parents' suburban home was lined with golden leaves, and somewhere inside, the scent of roasted turkey and spiced cider already wafted out through the slightly ajar windows. It was Thanksgiving, the one holiday he never could quite escape, no matter how far he had traveled or how busy his calendar became. Despite the years and miles, returning to this house always stirred the same quiet apprehension. It wasn't the food or the traditions, it was the hierarchy that seemed to reassert itself the moment he stepped inside. "Ethan," his mother called from the porch, her tone warm but laced with that subtle note of surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to show. She enveloped him in a hug that felt more like formality than affection. His father followed, clapping him on the back, already glancing past him toward the street as though expecting someone more impressive to arrive. That someone came 15 minutes later with the usual fanfare. Noah's entrance was cinematic. His luxury SUV rolled in with polished confidence, holiday music softly playing behind tinted windows. He stepped out wearing a cashmere coat, perfectly tousled hair, and a grin that announced he was once again the main event. "Guess what, everyone?" Noah's voice rang out even before the front door fully closed behind him. "I just bought a gorgeous home in Highland Park. 3 stories, marble floors, pool out back. You should see the wine cellar. Killer spot for entertaining." He said it as if it were casual, but his eyes sparkled with anticipation like a performer waiting for applause. Their parents lit up like Christmas lights. "Wow, Noah, that's incredible," their mother gushed. "You've really made it." "A real investment," added their father with a proud nod. "Something you can build a future on." Ethan stood by the mantel, swirling a glass of cider, saying nothing. He watched Noah soak up the admiration, his voice rising with details, how he negotiated the deal himself, closed in record time, and how the real estate agent called him a shark. And then it came, the moment Ethan had predicted with eerie accuracy. "Noah's doing so well," their mother said, her eyes drifting to Ethan like a spotlight turning cold. "Sweetheart, when are you going to settle down? Start thinking seriously about your future." It wasn't an attack, but a reflex one shaped by years of comparison, years of silent assumptions. The question hung in the air as if it were innocent, as if it hadn't been asked a dozen times before. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply met her gaze with a calm that unnerved even himself. His thoughts were quiet but clear. "You have no idea how settled I already am." He turned back to his drink, letting the sounds of silverware and laughter carry on around him. But inside, a storm had begun to stir. Not of anger, not even resentment, just resolve. The kind that builds silently over years and chooses with precision the moment to speak. As the dinner progressed, Ethan's mind wandered through memory's dorm room nights. With ramen and spreadsheets, his first deal negotiated through a Craigslist ad. The moment he closed on his second apartment in Phoenix, completely off-market, cash only. These were not things he had ever shared. They were too precious, too complex for casual conversation, and certainly not the kind of victories that earned applause at this table. Noah leaned back in his chair, arms stretched with satisfaction, detailing his upcoming plans to renovate the pool deck. "We're thinking travertine," he said. "Gives it that Mediterranean feel." "Very Hamptons. Sounds like you've really thought it through," their father said, nodding. "That's how success is done. Big moves, bold vision." Ethan forced a smile, sipping his drink. He could practically hear the ticking of their unspoken clock. Tick. "When will you settle down, Talk? When will you get serious?" He looked across the table at his mother, who was watching Noah like he hung the moon. She never meant to hurt Ethan, he knew that. Her disappointment was never cruel, just confident. Confident that he hadn't figured it out yet. But tonight something shifted. Not in her, in him. He felt it like a tide coming in. Slow, strong, undeniable. Tonight, Ethan thought, letting the cider coat his tongue might just be the night I show them who I really am. His mother smiled politely, but it was Noah who got the praise that night for winning a school competition in math. "He's going somewhere," their father had said. "Ethan, you're our dreamer, but Noah's got drive." The pattern repeated endlessly. Noah was the achiever. Ethan was the imaginative one, too soft, too uncertain, too impractical. The labels stuck like wet paint never drying. Every science fair, Noah stood with trophies while Ethan stood with ideas that never made it past concept boards. Family dinners felt like silent contests. Over time, Ethan stopped competing. In high school, Ethan had quietly taken night classes in drafting and keyboard design while his parents attended Noah's award ceremony. In college, he sold designs to a niche furniture startup to cover his rent. These moments were never mentioned at home. It wasn't malice, it was simply oversight, a family so used to seeing him as the other son that his successes became invisible. There had been one person who never ignored him. When he was 11, after one particularly disheartening dinner where Noah's latest accolade once again stole the spotlight, Ethan sat in his room trying to finish a sketch of a treehouse he dreamed of building. Olivia, then barely 4 years old, toddled in with crayons in hand. She sat beside him and asked to help. She couldn't draw straight lines, but she listened. She told him his ideas were cool, and in that moment Ethan felt seen. It became a quiet tradition, him sketching her, coloring beside him. No judgment, no competition, just companionship. So he built his success outside the family's gaze. By 26, he had co-founded a modest investment group focused on underdeveloped neighborhoods. He traveled to Detroit, then Phoenix, and finally Seattle, flipping properties, reinvesting profits. At 30, he took a calculated risk, purchasing a 4-unit apartment building with savings and no partners. It paid off. By the time he turned 35, Ethan owned properties in 6 cities. He knew zoning laws in 3 states by heart, and contractors called him first when permits came through. He had learned to make patience profitable, yet none of this crossed the threshold of his parents' front door. Part of him didn't want it to. There was only one person who noticed. "Hey, stranger," a voice whispered beside him. Olivia, his younger sister, 28, kind-eyed and sharp. She was the only one in the family who never picked sides. While their parents oscillated between pride and disappointment, Olivia simply observed. She was an artist, a social worker, a listener. Ethan smiled. "Liv, you okay?" she asked, not needing context. He nodded, then paused. "I'm used to it." She looked at him with quiet knowing. "That doesn't mean you should be." She gently touched his arm. "You've built something real, Ethan. Just because they don't see it doesn't mean it's not shining." Her words lingered, like a balm, like an invitation. They sat quietly together, a silent pact forming between them. Olivia didn't need deals. She only needed to be present. And in that moment, Ethan realized he wasn't as alone as he thought. Not completely. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the din of laughter fade into a more distant soundscape. And in that inner silence, the past returned not in flashes, but in a quiet tide. Ethan remembered being 10 years old, sitting at the dinner knot tonight. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, an email arrived in Ethan's inbox. It was from his mother, forwarded with pride and plenty of exclamation marks. The subject line read, "Noah's Big Heart." The body of the email contained a sleek digital invitation to a gala at a luxury hotel in downtown Dallas. The event promised cocktails, live music, and an auction, all to benefit a charity called Hope Bridge Foundation, empowering disadvantaged youth across Texas. The tagline beneath Noah's smiling headshot read, "Raising 6 figures to shape a brighter future." Ethan stared at the screen, his face expressionless, but his stomach twisted. The design was professional, the mission statement inspiring. But something gnawed at him, an instinct sharpened by years of reading contracts and fine print. He clicked the RSVP link, which led to a page requiring donations before entry. Suggested amounts started at $500. He opened a new tab and began to search Hope Bridge Foundation. The results were suspiciously thin. A sparse Instagram account with only a few curated photos, a website built on a basic template, no press coverage, no tax ID listings. The domain name had been registered just 3 months ago. That evening, he called Olivia. "Have you heard about Noah's charity gala?" "Yeah," she said cautiously. "Mom won't stop talking about it. She even bought a new dress. Why?" "There's almost nothing online about the foundation. No history, and the domain's brand new." Olivia paused. "That's weird. Want me to poke around?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I was hoping you'd say that." Over the next few days, Olivia activated her quiet network nonprofit friends. A cousin in forensic accounting and her own expertise from evaluating charities in social work. What they found made both of them uneasy. The Hope Bridge Foundation was not registered as a 501c3 nonprofit. It had no federal tax ID, no public record of board members, and no physical office beyond a leased mailbox in a co-working space in Plano. More alarming was a flagged transaction the family trust established decades ago by their grandfather had sent a recent wire transfer for $150,000 labeled as consulting services. That same amount had been touted in Noah's speech as his personal contribution. "That's not a donation," Olivia said one night as they pored over records at Ethan's condo. "That's him using family funds and masking it as generosity." Ethan's expression darkened. "He's building a house of cards with our family's legacy." Their voices stayed low. This wasn't just another showy gesture by Noah, it was deception wrapped in virtue. Their parents, charmed and dazzled, were oblivious. "I checked his other ventures too," Olivia added, tapping her laptop. "There's a pattern. LLCs that open and shut within months. Payments that don't match invoices. He's funding a lifestyle, not a mission." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "And now he wants the whole city watching as he launders it all in a black tie event." The week before the gala, they quietly visited the venue posing as event planners. The staff remembered Noah but were evasive about the details: ticket revenue, guest list, even the auction items. Ethan photographed the layout and vendor documents. They began to compile everything into a shared file labeled Operation Mirror. They spent late nights connecting dots, comparing timelines, and interviewing people Noah had worked with. Some hinted at delayed payments. Others described projects that never materialized. All of it pointed to the same conclusion: Noah was not just exaggerating. He was orchestrating a fraud. But Ethan didn't want revenge. What he wanted was truth, to protect their parents from investing even more blind trust and to restore some dignity to the name their grandfather had built. Olivia, ever the empath, felt the sting differently. "I think he believes his own lie now," she said. "He's played the role so long he thinks he's the hero." Ethan nodded solemnly. "That's what makes him dangerous." The gala was 4 nights away. They weren't sure what they would find next, but they knew one thing: they were no longer passive observers. The truth would come to light, and when it did, it wouldn't be from scandal or spectacle, but from quiet, irrefutable fact. Ethan's home was a study in understated elegance. Nestled in the heart of Preston Hollow, a neighborhood synonymous with old money and discreet wealth, his $5 million estate exuded quiet power. White limestone walls framed by manicured hedges, expansive windows filtering golden afternoon light, and a backyard oasis complete with a koi pond and winding stone path. It was a place designed not to impress, but to soothe. Most of his neighbors were lawyers, doctors, or quietly prosperous entrepreneurs. No one asked too many questions. No one flaunted status. And that suited Ethan just fine. He had built his life on the principle that real success didn't need a spotlight. Each morning began with ritual: a black coffee brewed from freshly ground beans, a brisk walk through his private garden, and time spent reading real estate reports before sunrise. He kept his routines sharp and his calendar clean. His wealth was unencumbered: no mortgages, no car payments, no looming debt. Every piece of furniture, every square inch of that home was paid for in full. Ethan didn't live this way to prove anything. He lived this way because he had once known the sting of being underestimated. Sitting in his study, surrounded by shelves of architectural books and muted modern art, Ethan often thought back to where it had all started: a cold winter in Detroit 13 years earlier. He'd been 22, fresh out of college with a degree in architecture and no real experience. He couldn't afford a real office, so he rented a desk at a local cafe and operated off a refurbished laptop. His first project was a dilapidated duplex he found through a city foreclosure auction, cost $12,000. Friends called him foolish. Family called him idealistic. He called it a beginning. The renovation took 8 months. He worked alongside contractors, learned to lay tile, fix piping, and negotiate city permits. He lived in the second unit while leasing the first to a family of 5. When he sold the property a year later, he netted a $34,000 profit. He reinvested every dollar. Over the next 5 years, he moved from city to city: Phoenix, Minneapolis, Charlotte. Each time chasing undervalued neighborhoods and believing in the stories written in cracked sidewalks and boarded windows. But the journey wasn't romantic. It was solitary. There were weeks when he didn't know if he'd meet payroll. Nights when tenants broke leases and pipes burst during snowstorms. Banks rejected him. Realtors dismissed him. In one town, a city inspector laughed in his face. But slowly, deal by deal, Ethan learned to navigate not just markets, but people. He learned that trust was more powerful than charm, that patience paid higher returns than impulse, and that sometimes the best way to outshine someone was to never compete in the first place. He never posted photos of properties, never announced closings. While Noah crafted a persona, Ethan crafted longevity. His portfolio expanded, but his presence remained quiet. By the time he was 35, he held stakes in 15 properties across 6 states and sat on advisory boards for 2 investment groups. None of this was known to his parents. He had once mentioned a new project over dinner and watched as the topic was redirected back to Noah's latest car. He stopped trying after that. It didn't hurt anymore. Not really. It just confirmed things. The quiet became his shield, and within that silence, he found something rare peace. When Olivia came to visit, she understood immediately. She never asked about square footage or the cost of art. Instead, she touched the handmade clay bowls on the shelves, admired the light through the high windows, and said, "It feels like you here." They often sat on the back porch with tea talking about ideas, hers for community outreach programs, his for sustainable housing models. She was the only person he let inside the full version of himself. And now, with the gala approaching and their investigation deepening, his home became something else, a war room. Files lined the dining table. Flowcharts tracked Noah's business ventures. Bank statements, domain registrations, LLC documents. It was a case built with the same precision Ethan had always lived by. Yet even in this quiet campaign, Ethan never lost his grounding. He still woke early, still walked the garden, still believed in the silence of success because noise could be faked. But peace was earned. The discovery came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Olivia sat cross-legged on the floor of Ethan's study, her laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. Ethan stood behind her, arms crossed, watching as her screen filled with line items and transaction codes. They had been combing through financial records linked to Noah and the family trust for days, but nothing could have prepared them for what they found next. "Wait, stop. Go back," Ethan said, leaning forward. Olivia clicked back a page and highlighted a line. It was a transfer from the family's educational fund set up when they were kids, meant to support any advanced studies Olivia or future grandchildren might pursue. The amount was $40,000, labeled as event services. A second transfer followed, this time $85,000 from their father's retirement account. The description was even more vague: strategic planning consultancy. Olivia's jaw clenched. "He used my education fund." Ethan's voice dropped. "And Dad's retirement, all for his little masquerade." They stared at the screen in disbelief. It wasn't just manipulation anymore, it was theft disguised as vision. Noah hadn't just lied to donors or misled the public. He had raided the very foundation of their family's future to fund an illusion of philanthropy. "We have to tell them," Olivia said. "Not yet." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "If we confront him now, he'll spin it. Say it's a misunderstanding, a clerical error. We need clarity. We need evidence they can't ignore." He paused, his eyes drifting to the rain-streaked window. "And we need the right moment. One where they'll see it not through his words but through truth." That night, after Olivia left, Ethan sat at his desk, notebook open, pen hovering above the page. He didn't write numbers or dates. Instead, he wrote thoughts, fragments, feelings. He wrote about the strange loneliness of being the invisible son, about how it felt to be quietly successful in a family that equated love with recognition. He wrote about the gala, about Olivia's steady courage, and about the aching realization that their family had built their trust on a fiction. And he wrote one line that stayed with him. "What do you do when your family loves a version of someone that never really existed?" He stared at those words, letting them settle. Growing up, he had envied Noah's confidence, his ease with charm, the way he filled a room. But now, with the evidence stacked high and the truth unbearable, Ethan saw it differently. Noah hadn't just played a role, he had become addicted to the applause it brought, and their parents, sweet, loving, naive, had never questioned the script. The next morning, Ethan called Olivia. "I'm ready," he said simply. "Me too." They weren't sure yet how the confrontation would unfold, But one thing was certain: the truth was no longer just theirs to bear. It belonged in the open. They would wait. For the gala. For the spotlight Noah had so carefully orchestrated. Because that's when the masks would fall. And this time the silence wouldn't protect him. The second Thanksgiving dinner arrived with the same orchestration as always. Fine china, the scent of roasted turkey, and the soft hum of jazz in the background. The entire Bennett family sat around the large oak dining table, their plates stacked with food, their spirits seemingly lifted. Noah, as expected, commanded the conversation. He was mid-story describing the art auction he had curated for the gala, tossing out names of artists as if they were old friends. He wore a blazer slightly too sharp for a family gathering, his voice a little too loud, his laughter too precise. "Our donors are excited," he said, cutting into his prime rib. "We've got 6 figures pledged already. It's going to be the biggest event of the season." Their mother beamed. "I always knew you were meant for something great, Noah." Their father added, "Just like your grandfather, always out front, a real leader." Ethan sat opposite, watching. He had said little since arriving, choosing instead to observe the room's energy. The tension buzzed under his skin, but he remained composed. His moment had not yet come. He toyed with his fork, watching Noah's animated hands as they gestured with performative ease. It wasn't the lies themselves that bothered Ethan most. It was how naturally they flowed from Noah's lips, how effortlessly their parents absorbed them. Olivia, seated beside their mother, sipped her wine and turned casually to Noah. Her voice was light, curious, almost playful. "What's the name of the foundation again?" "Hope Bridge, right?" Noah nodded, flashing a grin. "Yep, Hope Bridge Foundation. We're building bridges to opportunity." Olivia set down her glass. "Funny thing, I couldn't find it in the nonprofit registry. Checked last week. And this week, nothing under that name." The room stilled subtly but unmistakably. Noah's fork hovered mid-air. He recovered quickly, laughing. "Well, we're in the early stages of registration. Paperwork's filed. You know how slow the IRS is." Their father nodded, seemingly satisfied. But Olivia didn't break eye contact. "Weird. I thought registration was required before collecting donations." Noah's smile tightened. "It's all above board, Liv. Trust me." "I do," she said evenly. "I just like facts more." A soft silence fell over the table, interrupted only by the clink of silverware. Their mother, oblivious to the undertone, asked Noah about the gala menu. But the moment had already landed. Ethan remained quiet, hands folded in his lap. He studied his brother's composure as it frayed around the edges. Noah's shoulders stiffened. His next sentence came out a little rushed, a little defensive. And for the first time all evening, the spotlight dimmed just slightly. Later, as dishes were cleared and wine poured, the conversation drifted toward lighter topics: travel, holiday shopping, family anecdotes, but the tension lingered like a phantom. Noah grew quieter, glancing more often at his phone. He laughed at jokes a second too late. Their father, though jovial, cast a few puzzled glances toward his son. Olivia excused herself early, giving Ethan a knowing look as she stood. Outside, the sky had turned a cool indigo, the last rays of light filtering through the frosted windows. Ethan joined her on the porch a few minutes later. They didn't speak at first. The silence was warm, understood. "You planted the seed," he said finally. Olivia nodded. "It'll grow." He exhaled slowly. "He's slipping. He always overplays his hand." Ethan looked out at the horizon. "It's strange. I used to want to prove myself to them so badly. Now I just want them to see clearly." "They will," Olivia said. "Truth has a way of showing itself." Back inside, laughter resumed. Glasses clinked. The illusion held for now. But Ethan knew better. He knew that behind Noah's charm a fracture was spreading, and the next time they all gathered there would be no place for shadows to hide. The silent battle had begun, and Ethan was ready. The weekend after Thanksgiving, the family reconvened at their parents' home. The setting was informal, leftovers, reheated board games, pulled out music humming softly in the background. It was meant to be a casual wind-down, a moment of togetherness. But for Ethan and Olivia, it was the moment. They had decided not to attack, not to accuse. But the truth had a way of asserting itself even when delivered gently. As the family sat down for dinner, Noah, ever the narrator of his own legend, began again. "I've been getting calls from a couple of sponsors this week. Word's getting around. We're expecting media coverage, too." Their mother clapped her hands lightly. "Oh, Noah, you're going to be famous before New Year's." Noah chuckled modestly. "Just trying to make a difference." That's when Ethan spoke. His tone was mild, even conversational. "Hey, speaking of the gala, Dad, did you approve that withdrawal from your retirement account?" Forks paused mid-air. Their father blinked. "What withdrawal?" Olivia chimed in, her voice steady. "We noticed a transfer last week listed as consulting services tied to the Hope Bridge account, and another from my education fund." A long silence stretched over the table. Their mother's hand, mid-reach for a dinner roll, paused. The clink of silverware seemed louder than the background music. Noah's face paled slightly. "That was just temporary. To front some costs. I was going to reimburse it right after the event." "But you didn't tell anyone," Ethan said quietly. "Not Dad, not Mom, and the gala hasn't even been registered." Their father straightened. "Is this true?" Noah shifted uncomfortably. "It's not as bad as it sounds. Everything's under control." Olivia reached into her bag and slid a printed email across the table. "This is the transaction. The bank verified it. It didn't go through any family oversight." Their mother looked between them, confused. "I don't understand." "Noah, why wouldn't you tell us?" Noah opened his mouth to explain, but closed it again. His practiced charisma faltered. His hands clenched. The table's warmth cooled. Their father's voice, suddenly firm, said, "I want a full breakdown, Noah. Every transaction. I want to see it in writing." Noah's defenses crumbled. "You don't understand the pressure. I had to make it work. I couldn't let anyone down." Ethan, still calm, met his eyes. "This isn't about the money. It's about the assumption that no one would ask questions, that you'd never be held accountable." Noah's voice broke. "So what now?" "You win. I don't need to win." Ethan said, his voice low but resolute. "I just need you to stop pretending." The room fell into a heavy, echoing silence. No one moved. The air between them thickened with realization. Their father leaned back, eyes narrowing not in anger but in reflection. The weight of years spent trusting too easily was settling over him. "I raised you both to be honest," he said, his voice even. "I can forgive mistakes, but I can't forgive secrecy." Noah looked to his mother for rescue. She said nothing. Instead, she folded her napkin and placed it slowly on the table. "I thought if I looked like the success story, they'd finally see me," he whispered. "They already did," Olivia said gently. "But not for the reasons you hoped." Their father stood and left the table quietly. Their mother reached across, touching Noah's hand. Her expression unreadable. Ethan rose and stepped outside. The evening air was cold, crisp with early winter. He stared at the horizon. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt emptied, sobered. He recalled a moment from childhood, age 10, when Noah had won a school award and their parents threw a small party. Ethan had placed second in a county-wide art competition the same week, but no one had noticed. That night he had stood behind a curtain and watched the candles on Noah's cake flicker, while his own pride turned quiet inside his chest. Now, years later, a similar chill settled in him, not because of injustice, but because of understanding. He finally saw the boy behind the showman, fragile, craving validation, building castles on borrowed ground. He heard the door creak behind him. Olivia joined him on the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "He's breaking?" she said softly. Ethan nodded. Maybe it's the only way he'll rebuild honestly. They stood there together, the silence not heavy but shared. Behind them, the house no longer hummed with illusion. It simply breathed. The truth had come out. And though no voices had been raised, the foundation had shifted. Not with fire, but with gravity. The dining room remained untouched. Plates had gone cold. The air felt different, thicker somehow, as if every word left unspoken had gathered mass. The chandelier's soft glow cast elongated shadows across the table, where the remnants of Thanksgiving still sat like relics of a celebration that no longer felt genuine. Their mother sat motionless, her eyes fixed on nothing. Then slowly she raised a trembling hand to her mouth. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. "How could you, Noah?" she whispered, but not with anger. Only disbelief, as though something sacred had quietly collapsed within her. Their father stood behind her chair, one hand resting on its back, the other pressed to his temple. He looked years older than he had the night before. There was no rage in his eyes, only vacancy, the gaze of a man betrayed not just by his son, but by his own lack of suspicion. The silence was not merely between sentences, it filled the walls, the corners, the cracks of a house once thought to be whole. Noah shifted, visibly smaller than the man who had once filled rooms with his ambition. I'll return it all," he stammered. "Every cent. I never meant Noah." Ethan's voice was clear, calm. He reached into his coat pocket and took out his phone. Unlocking it, he placed it face down on the table and slid it forward. "Bank records, the email trail, transfer confirmations, everything you thought no one would look for." Noah didn't move. His hands, once expressive and animated, now lay limp at his sides. The silence grew heavier, not because of judgment, but the absence of it. No one yelled. No one scolded. That perhaps was what stung most. There was a dignity to their stillness that amplified the magnitude of what had been broken. Their mother wiped her cheek and reached for Olivia's hand. It was the first time in years she had held it with intention. Olivia stiffened, then slowly closed her fingers around her mother's, grounding both of them. The gesture, simple and instinctive, spoke more than any reprimand could. Their father exhaled, finally speaking. "This wasn't just about money, Noah. You stole our faith, and that takes more than repayment to restore." "I thought it was temporary," Noah murmured. "I thought if the gala succeeded, I could put it all back. No one would notice." Ethan watched him, not with anger, but with deep, complicated sadness. "It's never just about putting it back. It's about believing you were entitled to take it in the first place." Noah looked between them, his mother's silent tears, his father's weary posture, Olivia's protective quiet, and for the first time he saw the walls closing in. Not from punishment, but from reality. He was no longer the golden sun cloaked in charm. He was a man who had spun a web and now stood tangled in it. "I'm sorry," he said. Ethan didn't reply right away. He stepped closer, leaned slightly forward, and said in a tone both intimate and public, "I don't need your apology. I don't even need your forgiveness." Noah's eyes flicked up. "I just need the truth." The weight of those words settled into the space between them. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was complete. And in some small, irreversible way, it changed everything. For the rest of the evening, few words were exchanged. Plates were cleared quietly. The sound of clinking cutlery against porcelain echoed louder than laughter ever had. Olivia stayed with their mother, helping her to bed, gently brushing her hair back like she did as a child. Their father made a single call to the bank before retreating to his study, closing the door with the softest click. Ethan sat alone in the living room for a while, watching the flicker of candlelight against the wall. A quiet part of him ached, not for vindication, but for the years lost in pretending. He thought about the time he'd written his first property deal contract in a dingy coffee shop, how he had celebrated alone with cheap champagne and a silent vow to prove himself. Not to them, but to himself. Noah eventually disappeared upstairs without another word. There was no door slam, no drama, just the sound of footsteps retreating down a hallway dimmed by more than light. And in that silence, the house began its slow, painful process of reckoning. The Bennett family had been cracked wide open. Not by anger, not by confrontation, but by something deeper, disappointment. But maybe, just maybe, something honest could begin to grow from the wreckage. In the garden of broken trust, perhaps a new kind of truth could be planted. And while healing would not come quickly, it would come tended by silence, nourished by time. The following morning, the sun rose slowly over the Bennett household, casting long streaks of golden light across the quiet rooms. No one spoke much at breakfast. The tension that had simmered for days now hung low and heavy like mist that refused to lift. Their father, usually measured and slow to act, was the one to break the silence. He stood at the head of the table holding a manila envelope. "Noah, we've discussed this," he said quietly but firmly. "You are no longer to manage or access the family trust, effective immediately." Noah didn't argue. He simply nodded, his eyes bloodshot, his hands folded in his lap. A man once defined by his ability to charm was now emptied of performance. He glanced briefly at his father, then quickly looked down, ashamed. Their mother said nothing. She didn't even look at him. That absence of eye contact, so small, so human, was a deeper cut than any reprimand. Olivia, seated beside her, gently set a cup of tea in her mother's hands. Her mother accepted it silently, fingers trembling slightly against the porcelain. The sound of the envelope being placed on the table was louder than expected. It thudded with the weight of consequences. Noah reached for it with slow, almost reluctant hands. He didn't open it. After breakfast, the house fell into an odd hush, the kind that comes after a storm but before anyone knows how to clean up. Ethan stepped outside to rake leaves, mundane, grounding work. He liked the crunch under his boots, the rhythm of sweeping. It gave him something to do with his hands while his mind raced. Later, while their parents rested in the den, Ethan and Olivia quietly washed the dishes. There was no need for words. The clinking of ceramic, the rhythm of scrubbing, the swish of running water filled the space with shared resolve. "He texted me last night," Olivia said softly, breaking the silence. Ethan looked over. "What did he say?" "I'm sorry, I lost myself. I need help." Ethan nodded, drying a plate. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stacked the plate neatly, then reached for another. "I think he means it," she added. "Maybe," Ethan said, "but meaning it doesn't erase what was done." "I know," Olivia replied, "but I also think you did the hardest part. You pulled the curtain back." Ethan turned toward her. She held his gaze with a kind of calm wisdom. "You didn't just stop him. You saved us from believing the lie a little longer." They moved to the living room afterward, sipping tea, the quiet between them no longer uncomfortable. Olivia shared a childhood memory, how she once overheard their parents praising Noah and questioning Ethan's choices. "I was 10, she said, "and I knew then that something about it wasn't fair." Ethan didn't say anything, but he reached over and squeezed her hand. It was a thank you. That night, Ethan sat alone in his room. Noah's message still unread on his phone. His thumb hovered over it. He considered replying, considered reaching out, but something held him back, not spite, not anger, but clarity. Some wounds didn't heal with a reply. Some truths needed space, silence time. Downstairs, Noah lingered in the guest room. He walked the perimeter of the room several times. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. He whispered apologies to no one, pacing, unsure what he was asking. Forgiveness for his lies or the years of pretending he didn't need anyone. The next day, Noah left. There were no dramatic goodbyes, just a quiet closing of the door and the distant hum of an engine starting. Ethan watched from an upstairs window. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the weight of all that had passed and the uncertainty of what came next. That evening, Olivia joined him on the back porch. The air was cool and the stars were starting to appear. The backyard felt like another world, a quiet one, untouched by drama, just stillness and space. "Will you ever forgive him?" she asked. Ethan exhaled. "I don't know. Maybe, but forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without the poison." She nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Then that's enough for tonight." And for now it was. Healing wouldn't come quickly, but in the stillness it had already begun. For Ethan, this wasn't about vindication or victory. It was about truth. It was about reclaiming space that had been stolen by illusion. And it was about remembering that sometimes stopping the lie, even silently, was the bravest thing you could do. And that courage, however quiet, was what the family needed most. The morning after Noah's departure, the sun broke through the sheer curtains of Ethan's bedroom. He stood barefoot on the balcony of his Preston Hollow home, wrapped in a thick robe, a mug of black coffee in his hand. The view below was serene, meticulously trimmed hedges, sunlight glinting off the pool's surface, and the gentle hum of Dallas coming to life. This house, this quiet sanctuary, was something he had built piece by piece. Not just in brick and mortar, but in sacrifices, risks, and years of quiet endurance. It wasn't the grandeur that mattered to him, but what it represented: autonomy, peace, and a life lived on his own terms. As he sipped his coffee, a faint buzz from the gate intercom broke the stillness. Ethan turned his head slightly, then walked to the panel mounted near the door. A voice crackled through. "There's a man named Noah Bennett here. He says he doesn't have an appointment." Ethan didn't respond right away. He pressed a button, bringing up the camera feed. There Noah stood, hands in the pockets of a windbreaker, looking nothing like the confident, glossy version of himself from weeks before. He looked older, softer, human. The security guard appeared next to him, politely confused. "Mr. Bennett, should I send him away?" Ethan watched in silence. He didn't answer. He didn't move to buzz Noah in. He simply stood there, the mug growing colder in his hand. Down at the gate, Noah looked up as if he sensed Ethan's presence high above. For a second, their eyes almost met through distance and screens. Then Noah gave a slow nod to the guard and turned away. He didn't plead, didn't wait. Just walked back to his car, shoulders hunched slightly under the weight of a reality he couldn't talk his way out of. Ethan exhaled slowly. There was no anger in him, no victory, only release. He set his coffee down on the balcony table and stepped inside. The house was quiet but warm. On the kitchen counter, Olivia had left a note, made some muffins. "Hope today feels light." He smiled faintly, folded the note, and placed it in a drawer where he kept old letters and reminders that meant something. As he moved through the rooms, Ethan felt something shift inside him, not dramatic, but real. For so long he had been defined by what he wasn't, not the favored child, not the golden boy, not the boastful success, but now he was simply himself. And that was enough. Later that day, Ethan walked through his home, touching familiar objects, photographs of properties he restored, a small sculpture Olivia gifted him years ago, an old contract from his first major investment. Every item told a piece of his story. That evening, he stood once more on the balcony. The sun was setting, the sky painted with hues of rose and gold. He thought about Noah not with resentment, but with acceptance. There were no easy resolutions, no neat endings. Just the quiet understanding that some people must walk their path alone until they choose differently. Ethan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He felt it then, that subtle but unmistakable sensation of peace, of a weight lifted, of freedom. The past had been loud, but the future would be quiet, and in that quiet Ethan would build something honest, not to prove anything, but simply to live well. And that finally would be enough.